Well, welcome back, everybody. This is going to be our latest episode and foray into the budget worship. This week, we're going to try something a little different. We're trying to keep the episodes dynamic, the locations dynamic. In case you haven't noticed, we're in a new place. This is one we might be a little squirrelish on because we all kind of are giggity over being in a Star Wars room. This is a room in one of our youth houses of the churches, and our youth pastor is very OCD about or putting this kind of thing together. So we decided we'd take advantage of this week. But anyway, this is a new locale. We're going to be doing a roundtable discussion type scenario this time. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to flip here and welcome to the other guys. We've got Jameson and Rob again. What we're going to do is just do topic based roundtable, but we're going to freestyle it a little bit. So some of the topics we're going to cover are just as an example. We're going to be talking about things like scheduling and using rotations. We're going to be talking about problems with. Let me just look at a couple of these. Lighting. We're going to talk about when is it too much, when is it not enough, what is good and bad. We're going to talk about things like volume control, which is a constant problem in a lot of churches. Rehearsals. How do you run a rehearsal? So I'm not going to get into all of it yet, but we're going to just kind of spoon feed this, and we're going to talk about real world scenarios. We're looking at three major perspectives here. All of us do all of everything, but generally speaking, I'm going to flip over here. Jameson is in the praise worship leader role. Rob is typically in a guitar or a drum role, musician esque. I'm typically in an audio visual role, tech role. I will transition to a bass role occasionally, and I'll play some other instruments. Rob will play other instruments. Jameson plays all the instruments, just about. So we all do it all, but we're all very centric on the main role that we have. So I'm gonna kind of feed these points, and we're gonna hit on some hot topics, and I'm gonna ask Jameson. I'm gonna ask Rob. So as we talk about these topics, we're hoping these will foray into some new episodes and some new things that we can really hit on. So if you see something or you hear something you really like, let us know, and we'll hit on that in a future episode. So I'm going to kick this off, and I'll be muting and unmuting as we go. So if I miss one, I apologize. But we're trying to keep the room audio to a minimum. That's for another episode. So the first thing I want to talk about for this one is scheduling and rotations. So this is one that we've all in the past. We won't say how recently past. We've all been burned by scenarios such as trying to get multiple musicians to rotate in and out, multiple tech members to rotate in and out so that people don't get burned out. Also, to handle things like life. I mean, people need to take vacations, they need to be sick every now and then and get over it. So, what I want to start with is Jameson because the praise leader position is probably the hardest because they're responsible for the general scheduling. So, the two main perspectives that I bring are how do you typically rotate a musician and a tech staff if you're over that as well to best fit people's schedules so that nobody's burnt out and things like that.
Well, there's so many. There's probably a sentence I could answer on this for every letter of the alphabet because of situations. But when you're in a situation where you have more people than you can use at once, find out who wants to be there every week because the majority of people that will serve on your team, they're going to be at church every week and they just as soon be working. And then find out those who maybe need to just be on call or maybe want to do once a month or every other week. And if you kind of work with them on what they want and fulfill that with rotating, like let's say in the tech team, I would have a first and third week team and a second and fourth week team, and then the fifth week teams would be either or every other time. And that way, everyone knew when they were on and when they were off. They would swap with each other if they needed to have a break or go to a graduation or something. They would, swap with each other on that. And then the teams that were together worked together, so it was the same team each week in the booth and not just different person for the lyrics every other week. Same way with singers. If you're blessed to have more vocalists than you can have on stage, you can use the same way. You're going to have some that want to be there every week, and as long as they understand that everyone can't lead a song every week, that there has to be rotating. But that usually will work itself out. And, I've never been blessed with the point where I had people waiting in line that wanted to be there every week. Rob, what do you think about? And we can bounce back to about scheduling.
See, I'm on the exact opposite end of that spectrum right now. I don't have enough musicians to where I can rotate my team, and I'm not really responsible. I'm responsible for the scheduling. I'm not responsible for the song selection. I have my two main singers and acoustic guitar player are really responsible. They're two girls. They're very, very talented. They're responsible for picking the songs and scheduling the songs. I'm responsible for scheduling who's there, or if somebody's not going to be there, I have to just jump in. And for example, my drummer just had to have a surgery. So for the last 2 weeks, instead of playing lead guitar like I usually do, I play drums, which I was a drummer and a guitar player, since I was a little kid. So it's perfectly comfortable for me to jump on either one. But that puts a lot of pressure. It puts a lot of pressure on, or takes a lot of pressure off of the team if they know that they've got somebody who's so versatile that can just jump in there. Now, my vocals, I'm a singer, but problem is my vocals are not reliable, mainly because I talk all day to people for a living, and that just trashes my voice. So I can't depend on that. So I try to stay off vocals as much as possible. But there's times when I get asked, hey, can you do the special for this week? So yeah, absolutely. I go ahead and prepare for that. So I live on the opposite spectrum where I don't have enough musicians. So what I have to do, and another part of that is I don't just serve at my church. I serve at other churches. So I try to schedule myself off once a month so I can go serve with Matt's church and serve with their worship leader. And I learned so much from her, and I take the lessons that I learned back to my church. But the thing is, that robs my church of a lead guitar player once a month. But I feel that the balance between what I learn and take back more than makes up for that.
Well, let's flip it in a pretend situation. Let's say I'm your worship leader at the place where you're not picking the songs, and I know that you're gonna having that 1 week a month to go play somewhere else. I wouldn't have an issue with that. That's something exactly what I was talking about. People that like to go to ball games, and people shouldn't have to not do serve. It should not have to be all or nothing. But like I said earlier, most people want to be all or nothing. They want to be there unless they can't be there. And for that reason, I've stepped into a couple of places that had rotating bands, and I immediately eliminated that. I was like, no, I want a core band, a core rhythm section, piano, keys, bass, drums. Who wants to be here every week? And it doesn't matter if it's the A or the D person. It's who wants to be here every week, and then everyone else could rotate and fill in. So it's just, a lot of individualism. But let's go to where you don't have all those options, which, like what you said, the situation you're in. I in the past few years, instead of trying to get substitute drummers, I found it easier to just build a set that didn't require drums so much. Heavy acoustic sets, like the Ren Collective stuff. That you can drum set on the acoustic. And that way you don't have a strange person coming into your rehearsal. And we'll jump to rehearsal if you want to jump straight into rehearsal for that, Matt.
We'll get to it in just a second, but keep going.
Because what I was getting here, we would have 5 familiar songs, and then we bring in a strange drummer, and we have to spend all our rehearsal time actually learning that song with a stranger instead of just, hey, let's pick some songs that doesn't require the drums this week, and not have to bring another person in. That's what I've been doing the past few years.
That actually brings up 2 quick things before we will segue into rehearsal, because I think that's a perfect transition. Mm-hmm. But before we do that, I did want to bring up 2 things that you mentioned. One of the things is, Rob, since you do transition to other church and play, this brings up a scenario, and there's other instances that do this as well. As a praise leader, worship leader, there are scenarios where you might actually want to pick your set list based on what your musicianship is for the week. If you've got a strong bass player, you might want to pick something that's very heavy, thick. If you've got a weak drummer, like you said, you may want an acoustic set. So rotations matter. It's not just to fix scheduling. It's also to get certain individuals that shine in certain ways in the rotation. And then that way, like, you might have a cajon player that's just a star, but he's not real good on a drum kit. So that completely changes what you do. So I'm not going to hit on that too deeply, but that's another instance where you can do that. The other thing that I wanted to hit on before we get into rehearsals, and it's kind of related, is set list. This is a hot topic. So I'm going to flip it back over to y'all, but one of the pain points, and I'll just call it what it is, there's no reason to beat around the bush, is how early to get songs, to get a set list. Every worship leader feels differently about this, in my opinion, from discussions. Is some want to match it to what the sermon is for the week, so they wait until the last minute. I'm not saying that's good or bad. It has obvious value to them and to some people. But I can speak from a musician's perspective, and especially a sound man's perspective. That's the worst thing you can do to me, because we're reacting instead of being proactive and actually prepping and talking and things like that. So what I personally don't like is to try to come in when I only play once a month, once every quarter, to come in and have to play a song with 2 days practice when I haven't even touched that instrument in months. So I'd like to just flip it over to y'all and see what your perspective is. Let's flip it this time, Rob, from the musician's perspective. How do you feel both ways?
Well, the more time I have to practice and to learn the songs, the more comfortable I am with it, the better I will perform the songs. And yes, I know that's the P word, but it really is. It's performing, and like as Jameson said a couple of weeks ago, whether you're performing for man or you're performing for God, you're still performing. So what happens is, when I'm playing with my church, my worship leaders, and I occasionally have to, I kind of have to gently nudge them to, hey, you get the songs out a little bit earlier. Because when we first transitioned from choir only to having a praise team, we had a big meeting with everybody on the praise team. We had a meeting with the pastor, and we asked him, how soon can you get the points out for what you're going to be preaching on? He said, no, I don't want you to do that. He said, I want you to make sure that your worship set stands on its own. He said, if my preaching is not as good one week, I want the worship team set to be able to carry that and not be attached to what I'm preaching. So really, our job became less about preparing for what the particular message was going to be, and just preparing hearts for the message. And that was a very, very obvious difference.
I like the way you worded that. Preparing the hearts for the message instead of trying to tie the message to the worship. But I do see the value in the other way around.
Oh, absolutely.
As a praise and worship leader, I only question this, and this is not aimed at anyone, and I would love for you to speak on this on the worship leader perspective. I fear that when you try to tie the two things together, that at some level, whether you mean to or not, you're trying to control the Holy Spirit, to try to control the emotions. And whether that's a bad thing or not is not for debate. We're not going to debate that here. The question is, do you agree as a praise leader that that's a risk that you take, and how do you deal with it?
Well, I think it's only a risk if you're doing it, trying to do that. If you're like, hey, I'm going to preach on this, you should sing this, and we'll turn the air conditioner down.
That's an extreme, but
I mean, I've never known anyone to do that. I was just being funny, but that's borderline blasphemy against the Holy Spirit. But let's back up.
Yeah,
so as a worship leader, first of all, I've got to do what the pastor says. So luckily, I have always been able to give the pastor to trust me to not want to suggest specific songs every week, because pastors are busy. They have a lot of people to care for, and if they want things to match up and they wait, it causes things to be not as good as they could be. But then again, I want the pastor to tell me if he has a favorite Christmas song or a series coming up and songs. But what I typically want and I'm a musician too, and I've been a musician and wasn't the leader, is some people will plan weeks and months ahead of time. Only time I do that is for like Christmas or Easter, something that you're going to need a lot of extra rehearsal and planning on. But I would do a plan by Sunday night or Monday morning of that week, and put and give all the material. And, you know, if it's a smaller church with a hymn book, you give them the page numbers. And then each week I would have that done by Monday. That way they had 2 days to, if nothing else, just to listen to everything before you'd have midweek rehearsal. The only time I will plan out further than that is like a series or during Christmas. You know, you've got anywhere from 3 to 5 services, Sunday services, that you need to do Christmas songs. So you don't want to crisscross yourself and end up doing the same one, or running out, or doing all the good ones early. You have to really think backwards all the way to Christmas Day, and think backwards with the songs, so you don't do Joy to the World 5 times.
That actually brings up a good point. I think the bottom line we're reaching here is every church is different, every pastor is different, every praise leader is different. You have to work to your congregation, to your staff. There's no right or wrong answer. You just have to make sure that you do it for the right reasons.
Can I offer some advice on this?
Yeah.
So I've actually had some pretty deep discussions with some clergy last year about this. You can, without knowing any scripture or who's going to be preaching and what they're going to preach on and what the scripture is, your first song should be a call to worship, and that doesn't have to be a big organ hymn. It can just be something that's upbeat, talks about how great our God is, and gets people's mind off of their bill list and their grocery list and the homework and whatever else, and it's like, hey, oh wait, we're at church. You know, that's what that song needs to do. It doesn't have to have a red thread attached to anything. And then you can have a worship set where you get people's minds and hearts on more God with, then you do that more lyrically and with slower songs. And then if you want to tie something together, I would only do that before the scripture's read, and then possibly as an invitation, if you can tie those things together. And that way, the whole service doesn't have to have the same theme for every song. Those first blocks of songs can always be, the fast opener, the meet and three, where you're gonna,
the meet and three. I like that.
And then your special music or offertory, whatever's going to be sung right before the scripture's read, typically, should be inviting. It doesn't have to be slow. But for example, this week we're going to do Open the Eyes, but we're doing all Advent music. But right before the sermon, we're going to Open the Eyes of My Heart. So, but it's exactly what we're wanting to do right before we hear the scripture and the word.
Absolutely.
That's right. You can definitely cruise control without having a plan from a liturgical calendar.
Well, and I'll expand really quickly on that. I see a couple of issues. I agree with you. That's a good template. That's a template a lot of churches use it. But also you have to be receptive to the fact that every congregation is different. Some might feel differently in different ways. But I would like to hit on two quick things. Number one, to your point of opening with a call to worship. Generally speaking, that's the best answer I've heard. Is there another way for different congregations? Yes, but in general, you want to step in and welcome God. And it reminded me of a song, and I don't know if y'all have ever played it or heard it. Pocket Full of Rocks, the welcome song. Have y'all are familiar with that?
Vaguely, but I'm not super familiar.
So
sing it for us, Matt.
No. So unlike Rob, I don't sing for different reasons, and you can read into that however you want. I don't care. But no, in one of my previous churches, I actually walked in one day after I had left that church. I came back, and they were playing this song, and I had never heard it. And I'd heard A Pocket Full of Rocks, but I'd never heard the song. But just in a nutshell, it's, you're welcome in this place, Lord. You're welcome here. Mm-hmm. We're here to praise. Taking all the liturgical stuff you're talking about aside and just welcoming God and saying, we're here to worship, forget everything else. That's critical to me. But I just wanted to hit on that and move on. And we're going to talk about rehearsals because there was a nice segue on the last one. But let's just jump into that. We've covered all that. So one of the points that I believe all of us here in this room, and I would say better than 75 or 80%, would probably agree with this statement. Rehearsals are misused by a lot of churches. And this was the other point I was going to make on the previous thing is most people who volunteer to play in a church praise and worship band have full-time jobs. that can dictate a rotation, that can dictate and the set list, how early you get it. It's not that you want people to get out of their comfort zone and do things that they don't want to do. It's just that I can speak to me. If you give me something on a Wednesday or a Thursday to try to prep for Sunday, well, my full time job means that I've probably got 2 windows to practice, 2 good windows. You've eliminated one of them right out of the gate. So that's the other issue. But that leads us into the rehearsal conversation, which is what are rehearsals for? And this is one I wanted to take a minute on and just expand. Because one of the biggest core mistakes that praise leaders, praise musicians, tech, everybody makes the mistake of is the rehearsal is to learn the song. Absolutely. And that is the biggest mistake anybody makes is the rehearsal is to rehearse the song. You come rehearsed and prepared on your own so that when you get together with the other musicians, y'all all have at least heard it, and now you just tighten up the nuts, make the thing work. But I would love from each of your perspectives. So, Jamie, from the praise and worship leader, what are the pet peeves and what do you wish people would take away from that?
Well, rehearsal is for rehearsing the song. You should know it. You should know what we're doing. You should know your part. You should be ready. That's on a high performance, team. That's going to, a high performance team. You know what I mean? If you're learning, that's practice. You can call practice learning, and you can have learning sessions after your rehearsal. But rehearsal is really, I was just telling some people this Wednesday night. Rehearsal, you don't really even need to go through the whole songs. How we're going to start this song, how we're going to transition right here, who's going to do, are you going to leave, are you going to walk up here, who's coming back up. I said that's really, it's a walkthrough. It's like a dress rehearsal. You don't do the whole play at the dress rehearsal. You check the lighting for each scene, you check the sets. That being said, many people, I even do, I like to run through all the songs because sometimes you need to do that just to feel how long they are and the timing, and if you may want to, cut something short or whatever, or try something different with your vocalist. Rob?
And I hate to backtrack here, but that also leads back to what we were talking about how early the songs come out, because the more time you have with them, the more time you have to be prepared. But once it comes to that rehearsal time, everybody should already know the song. It should be run through it. We're checking mic levels, we're checking the mix, we're checking how the tones, I'm being a guitar player, my tone is everything. I want to make sure that my tone is set right for these songs. In the actual space where we're going to be leading worship, because there's very few things more distracting than a bad tone on a guitar, or feedback or things like that. This is the things that we're looking for, and we're wanting to tighten up. If you use click and tracks, you want to make sure that the click and tracks work properly. You want to make sure everybody is tight on the click. You want to make sure your drummer's burying the click. These are the things that rehearsals are for. It is to polish, not to learn the song. You should already know the song by the time rehearsal comes around.
Well, I've told people that I've had to spend time with that it's really disrespectful to have to take 15 minutes out of a 1 hour rehearsal to teach one person the song, or for an electric guitar player to try to find that perfect delay patch that he's looking for, to spend 15 minutes of the rehearsal time for that, or being late. Yeah. Especially if you're a lead vocalist or if you have a primary position like electric guitar or drums. If you're late, sometimes things can't be helped, but I'm talking about consistency.
Mm-hmm. Before you go into that next thought, I want to chase a real fast 30-second rabbit. Mm-hmm. From the non-musician perspective, one of my pet peeves, and it's not here, it's not there, it's happened at different times. One of my pet peeves as a sound man tech is watching musicians fight in-ear monitors, wedges, and do all this stuff that to me is a simple matter of training to understand what do you need, tell the sound man, right. Or if you're using an in-ear system, understanding how to mix simply in your ears. This is not a shot at anybody. It's the same problem as somebody coming in and having to learn the song. When you come in and you got an hour and a half practice or an hour practice, and the first 15 minutes is people sitting there tweaking knobs just trying to be able to hear what they need to hear, that's training. That's issues. We need to get that out of there, because your first thing should be, what's the set list? What's the order? Okay, I need to make sure my guitar pedals got the right patches in the right order. All right, we're ready to go. Let's practice.
And people are teachable. I mean, most of the time with church musicians, they've just gotten good enough to do this, so you have to teach them, and you have to explain to them why they should be like why you should bring your own guitar cable, why you should bring your own guitar stand, because it's the real world, and when you go somewhere, people don't provide those things for you. And it's just because they don't know. It's not because they just don't want to do the right thing most of the time. But rehearsals can be, it's good to just set rules. I have had to set rules with sound adjustments to once a month. Like, you only get to ask once a month. And so you better get it done in that 5 minutes. That one Wednesday a month, we're going to spend adjusting everyone's signal.
And I'd like to make a point to that. That was kind of what I was getting at, is take a rehearsal, or at least part of a rehearsal, and make it a sound rehearsal. I recommend that to everybody.
At least once a quarter.
Stop. We're not doing music for a little bit. We're just going to rehearse and make sure that you know how to ask me for what you need the correct way, how to tweak the in-ears minimally to get what you need so that we're not wasting each other's time, and how to act professionally toward each other.
Right.
Because that's one of the biggest things in churches is people wear their emotions on their sleeve, and when you start fussing at people, I can't hear myself in the monitor, that just creates tension.
Right.
Let's create professionalism so that we can move on to
I
the
like
music.
to open those frustrations with, look, we all want this to sound as good as it can be. And as long as we all understand that might involve me being not as big a part of the equation as I think it should be, because we're looking for the bigger picture here. And me, including the worship leader and whomever, should never be bigger than the sound as a whole. That's a whole another thing. But
it's a landmine.
But like I said, sometimes people don't understand the rules, and they don't understand how disruptive that is to constantly need more. And you almost want to tell them, no, you don't. You don't need more. And sometimes you have to do that. But you have to. It's like Matt said earlier about each church is different and each person's different. That just comes with experience, and leadership is learning how to come up with solutions. You don't want anyone to be angry, because the other thing is that spirit, that anger, that it will ruin. It will ruin it. That just a tiny ounce of anger or animosity, even just between two of your team members, will really can hurt the spirit of the whole service.
Yeah, agreed. And I've seen too many good musicians, and churches complain about we can't find good musicians. Well, you might have run some of them off and not even meant to. You know what I mean?
Right.
So it's
musicians are sensitive. They're a sensitive lot.
We're artists, whether we like it or not.
Artistic people are sensitive. I like to tell people that my suggestions are not criticisms and personal stabs. If you have $100 and I have $105, I have more money than you, but you still have $100.
Yeah.
You don't have zero just because I have more.
And another thing that I really wanted to jump into real quick, because Matt brought this up, and it's so important, is communication. I can give you examples of times when I've had people say, with me playing drums, I want you to play faster or slower, when what they really wanted wasn't faster or slower. They wanted to fill more space, or they wanted it to take less space. I've had, I need you to make it softer, I need you to make it softer. And I wasn't understanding what was being asked of me. And then Matt, having a background in percussion, said, "Hey Rob, I need you to switch to halftime right here." Oh, okay. Well, yeah, that's all you had to do was ask.
Communication.
Communication's everything.
That's a big. I've never. I'm a drummer, so the biggest thing I've gotten when I deal with new people is like, "Oh, I'm so glad you know how to communicate with a drummer," and it's just they don't know how. But you work with what you have.
Absolutely.
But here's one thing. Here's another sound tip. Just with squashing things, is I was just talking about this today about resetting the gain structure once a quarter, because typically things get turned up and turned up and turned up and turned up. So what I will ask, if someone says, "Well, I can't hear myself anymore," and I'll say, "Well, who has enough that they could turn themselves down a little bit? Who can give some of themselves down right now?" let's start there before we turn one thing up. And most of the time, you don't have to turn everything down because people will back down then, because a lot of it's energy. And
that actually brings up a very quick conversation that has happened semi-recently, and this is not a stab, this is not a pointer, but it's something that tech deals with every week. Digital boards are a lifesaver, in my opinion. Analog, we used to fight this constantly. One of the things that I do personally as a tech is I reset my board every week. Right. I reset it to a scene that I know is a bass scene, and then I apply the volume changes and things. Sometimes that can create tension because people say, well, it was good last week. Why'd you have to reset it? Well, scene rather than what you said, which is build it up, build it up, build it up, and all of a sudden you're 3 weeks down the road, 6 weeks down the road, and all the gains are literally redlining right there at the top, and you're like, reset, you know.
Well, and there is fatigue, you know, if you're playing, you know, high, especially if you're the drums or the electric guitar, you know, there's hearing fatigue where you do need it to be louder by the fifth song, especially if you're playing 5 in a row. But you should learn how to compensate for that. Like you talked about a couple episodes ago about turning your guitar down to 7 and going, I'm all the way up, you know.
That's
you know,
terrible idea.
Well, but in some cases, the sound as an overall needs that amount to in the well. We're getting off into a technical discussion. What should we talk about next, man?
Yeah, we'll do some more episodes on the techniques. I'll be the first to admit when I play acoustic guitar, I love having a volume switch or a volume pedal that when I finger pick I can push up. But to a sound man's perspective, that's horrible, you know, because it changes it. Let's gear away from that squirrel chase. I'd like to finish up with a general freestyle conversation about something that we've kind of alluded to, and that is performance dynamics. We're going to hit on a couple of quick things about it, but the fundamental part of this is when does the performance level become heretical or anti-God, or when does it reach a point where you're just doing it for the performance sake? And I'm just going to give a couple of examples. Number one, lighting. Lighting's a big deal to me. That was the one thing I struggled with the most, and now I'm really digging in on lighting to figure out how to do it the best for videography primarily. But the point is, I see a lot of these streams on churches, and I'm like, man, that's a really good band, but that's a flippin' rock concert with pyrotechnics and lighting. Is that really helping get the word across or to help lead people into worship? It might be. I don't know. I don't speak for everybody, but I know for my taste, I'm more a natural lighting type thing. But the other point, and I'm going to throw it over to y'all, in addition to the lighting, the overall question is, when is it too much? When has lighting become against the flow? The other thing is volume. And I do this because some people are into Christian rap. I won't use the euphemism for that or the anachronism. But some people are into hip-hop style. There's different styles that you can play, and this might push the bass. This might push the drums, these kind of things. At some level, this crosses a threshold where it's no longer good. It's just performing versus actually leading people into worship. So I'm going to start with Rob on this one. And the reason I'm starting with Rob is, as a guitarist, it can be very easy, and I play enough guitar to know, to try to reproduce a performance or a sound, which is a good thing. It brings the level of excellence up, but at some point, you're really layering some things in so thick that I wonder, does it take away from the overall thing, which is worship? What's your perspective on that?
My perspective on that is a hard one, and it's something that I've talked about, and I think we talked about it either the last episode or episode before, when we were talking about contemporary worship, as a matter of fact, where I just flat out come out and said, you know, I have a problem with this, and this is something that I have to be in constant prayer about, because I grew up in the musician's life. I grew up, you know, playing on stage. I grew up in a recording studio, so for me, that becomes so addictive that it's a constant struggle to make sure, hey, this is not about me. I'm here to do my job. I am here to lead the congregation in worship from my guitar. I have to be in constant prayer about that, because if I don't, then that the little black monster inside that says, hey, it's all about me, that comes out to play, and that's never fun. And it's something that I actually can't always do on my own. Sometimes I have to have my wife step in and say, look, focus on why you're doing this.
And if you ever need that, if as a musician, if you ever need a come to Jesus moment, your sound tech is the perfect person to give it to you. As a sound tech, I will tell you, I can bring a musician down to their knees so fast. So just use them. That's their calling, is to just make you realize it's not all about you.
It's humbling. It's very humbling when you have a good sound tech that'll stay on top of that.
This all of Matt's topics have a uniquely same answer to me, and it's location. I have been in congregations where the lighting was important because the rest of the room looked like a warehouse. The stage was the only finished portion of the whole venue.
We have one right across the street.
But if you were in a sanctuary, with windows, then any other, there's just, and it's congregational too. You may have it's according to who you speak. Like when they had the basement, someone just brought that up the other day to me. So that would inhabit the rap music, a lot of subs. But look who they were reaching at the time, And there's no different to me than raising your hands, closing your eyes, and singing a hymn as some kid bouncing to a beat, going, God, God's with me. God's, the same words. All of that is as long, and as far as get your shining on, everyone should have an only purpose of leading worship and leading others into opening up their hearts and minds to Jesus, because that's the only reason we're doing it. I had a discussion yesterday with, people don't know when to sing. And I was like, well, what do you mean? If there's any singing going on, you can sing. That's what we should be doing. Yeah. No one should be singing a solo, as far as we do have soloists on the microphone, as far as to make the song flow, but no one should expect silence while they do their solo, is maybe a better way to put it.
Well, and you hit a topic that I wanted to hit on this, the lighting specifically. I want to clarify. We're talking about two different points of lighting. Number one, there's lighting for correction. Okay, this happened during COVID. A lot of people were made aware of just how bad their room looked, their sanctuary looked, because video will bring the worst out. And I'm just going to use where we're at right now. Luckily, we're using decent cameras. We're in a decently lit room, but let's be real. There's correction lighting that you can use to fix this. And then we're talking about the problem lighting is, to me, like, the correction lighting is taking spotlights to illuminate your stage because you've got LED lights that glow blue. We have that problem ourselves. That's great lighting. I'm not fussing about that lighting. What I'm talking about is the pyrotechnics, theatrical lighting, where you have some of these streams I see literally like wash lights, which look cool. Don't get me wrong. I love them. I use them for effect and stuff. But then you've got these bouncy lights going all over the place, and you've got fog and stuff. And I'm like, at what point does that become anti-worship?
Right.
We're not going to get into the weeds on it, but my point is, from your perspective as a worship leader, Jamie, at what point does it distract you, or do you feel like the production has taken over too much and you got to back out of it and fight it at that point?
Well, I've never allowed it to get to that point, because to me the song is always boss. Whatever song it is the boss, and whatever whatever the song is talking about is for that particular moment in the service. When I've been in facilities that had, great lighting and the ability to do whatever I wanted, whatever I said to do, we could do. The only time that we ever had anything and this is just personal choices though, but the only time we ever moved stuff were like special, like when we would do like our Christmas cantata, and we would have, like some of the bigger songs would have a dancing light, something that would change colors with the beat. Some people, this is really a complex issue, because I don't want to step on anyone's ministry, because I know lots of people are doing great work with full-blown, Trans-Siberian Orchestra style productions, if you want to call them a production, but still being evangelical, because they're reaching people who will never, ever come to a church with a steeple on it, and there are lots of people out there that will never come to a church with a steeple on it. just because of some hurt in their past or their parents' past or something is there. And I'm saying to meet Christ. I'm not saying they wouldn't ever. All things are possible, but
No, that's a fair point. There, you have to go to where people are to get them to. I don't want to say get them because it's not our job to get them; it's God's job. But you do have to meet people in the world they live. Where I have a problem is where, and this is me personally, like you said, there's good that happens from this, but where I have a problem is churches specifically that have incorporated such theatrics into their performance that you can't even tell that they're worshiping
right.
God.
Yeah.
And at that point, that I believe that's where it's a leadership issue. They need to pray, get back in the Word, and realize: are we taking away? And I know as a musician, you may feel differently, and chime in if you do, Rob.
I have a little bit of a different perspective on this because I also have a theatrical background, which that was a very, 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 very long time ago. But I'm dealing with this with my church right now because we're going through a transition where we just had all LED lights installed in the sanctuary that were on all the time. And I'd be sitting back there playing the drums with the choir and looking around, and there would be so many people that instead of paying attention to the song, were just looking around to see what everybody else was doing. So my recommendation to the pastor was, hey, let's do this. During worship, let's cut the lights in the sanctuary, leave the LEDs on top of that are up above the stage, leave those on, leave the choir lights on, so that it causes people to stop focusing on what's going on around them and focusing on
I'd
what's
like
going
to speak
on.
to that. You're dead on. That is, you've left corrective lighting and you've gone to theatrical lighting, but it's theatrical lighting with a purpose.
Directive, yeah.
It's not dynamic performance lighting. We do that as well here. We actually dim the lights to create an ambiance, and again, that's a thing. That's a line you have to.
It's like thematic, yeah.
Yeah, but to your point, that is a fair point. I have seen the Holy Spirit move more. Not saying it's constantly this way, but I've seen Him move more in an environment that has an ambiance set than He might have if everything was just lit.
Well, it's kind of like those telescopes you had when you were a kid. If you create, if you're in and we don't want to step on anyone because I've had great church and gymnasiums, and I'm talking about gymnasiums, not like carpeted. I'm talking about in the gym, where nothing was going to look good or sound good. God can be anywhere, and you can have worship anywhere. But talking about for permanent status, it's focusing like what Rob said. People looking around the room because it's lit up. Whereas if the only thing is lit up is the screens or the stage or the focal point of where worship is at the moment, whether that be a reading or a scripture reading or even the announcements, that's different from. Get back to theatrics. No one person or group should ever be boasted as being special or above anything in worship on the stage or off, in my opinion. And I'm all for guitar solos, and we do them, and piano solos, but they are not to the point where anyone is giving that person praise. We're still praising God. We're just praising with our abilities,
To better clarify that statement, a solo for a praise and worship perspective is to guide the flow of the song, as you mentioned earlier, and less about showcasing instrumentation.
Right.
It's to help the flow, because let's be honest, not all praise and worship songs flow well without gaps. Without fillers.
You don't want to sing from start to finish every 4-minute song, and and if you've got someone who can play the melody again or chop on the piano or do a guitar solo, people will respond to that as well as they will a great vocalist singing the verse. They'll respond to it.
And this was a problem. I won't say a specific decade, but I'll give you 2 or 3, specifically the 80s and the 90s and maybe even back into the 70s. This was a problem people had with contemporary Christian, and at that point I wouldn't have even called it contemporary. It was more Southern gospel-y, and a lot of people there was a severe gap between Christian praise and worship at the time and secular music, because secular was about the music, Christian praise and worship, fair enough, was about the praise and worship. But to your point, they weren't trying to make them feel similar from a notes perspective, from a musician perspective. So when people hear what was the group? Forgive me for a second. The gospel quartets, the big one, Gaithers. That's the one that comes to my mind. The Gaithers are amazing musicians. They're amazing vocalists. They do wonderful things, but there's so much negativity associated with that Southern gospel feel that musical transition that they did that was just lacking all the polishing. So I know I'm kind of stumbling on that.
It's genre-ish. It's a genre,
Yeah.
That's a genre.
But I believe Christian contemporary in the last couple of decades has corrected for a lot of that.
Right.
Because the musicianship, they've realized we need to mimic it as much as we can musically without becoming it vocally and lyrically.
Right. Well, and that's what it did. You replicate success, and you the music businesses collided, and you replicate success. But whatever's hot, everyone's going to copy it, whether it be country, pop, Christian. They want to reach as many people. Hopefully, the Christian labels are trying to reach many people for a different reason than the secular labels. But that's genre-ish, But thank God that the same, the Gaithers can fill up Legacy Arena, and so can Winter Jam,
Yeah.
Completely different. All bring glory to God, though.
Let me ask you a direct question, and we're going to kind of wrap this one up for round one. We're going to do a round two, and we're going to bring some topic ends like special events. I'd like to do that one in round two because I'd like to get through Christmas and do some lessons learned. Because some of us right now,
I'd say right now is probably the perfect time to hit that.
Well, we're going to do it right after it, but I want to take this year and have it fresh on our minds and talk about what could we have done better, why is it a problem, the angst that it creates. But that's for round two. We'll hit that. We're going to talk about some traditional versus contemporary hymns and that kind of thing. But for this one, I'd like to wrap it up, and I'm going to finish it with a very specific question. I believe, this is me, that the single greatest thing that has taken Christian contemporary music to the next level was the digital personal studio. My belief in this is centered around the fact that before this, to get your sound out, you had to go through labels. You had to go through these professional recording studios that, let's just be real, were cost prohibitive to people trying to get this out. The fact that people can literally sit in a room like this or in a basement and record studio quality recordings has, in my opinion, brought Christian contemporary to an equal footing with secular. And the reason I'm asking this is, A, do y'all agree, or do you think there's more to it than that? And B, how can we utilize that in a worship environment? I'm trying to figure that out. It's like, how do I take that same thing and take the worship environment and give non-believers something to look at without it becoming a performance? So anyway, discuss.
Well, we're in a time right now where whatever your mind thinks, you can look it up and get the answer. How do you make homemade noodles? Get the answer. How do you say my dog's name in Chinese? Answer. So people are. It's an instant gratification. So I think as the church and as leaders in the church and workers, we have to adapt to that. If you think you're not going to reach anybody on YouTube, then no one watches TV anymore. The kids don't even know what a commercial is. It's an ad. How our generation is like, hey. I go to the bathroom during the commercial. What's a commercial? The ad. Oh, it's an ad. That's a real.
And you couldn't skip it back then either.
No.
Well, and I will tell you personally, the one thing that I think, there's a lot of ways to answer the question that I just posed, but there's one way that's in my heart right now really hard, and it centers around joy. Mm-hmm. If you don't see joy on the faces of the people that are worshiping a God that they want you to come to know, then why do you want to worship that God?
Exactly.
And I think that's what's missing. Not saying it's missing everywhere. I'm saying it's missing where I see it missing. I think if your stage doesn't showcase the joy of Christ every week, forget all the theatrics, forget all the extra layers, take them away, because there are those people that I can tell you are in your head right now. There's one in my head right now that when you walk up and see their face, I don't care if I like this person, I don't care if I love this person. This person loves Jesus, right, and I want what they have.
You can't fake sincerity.
Correct. I think that's the question I have, is how do we utilize the studio issue that I believe is what moved Christian things forward. I believe that we make what we're presenting to the people as good as possible to catch their attention. But I think beyond that, it showcases in our faces. As musicians, it's very easy to get bogged down and get up there and just your face is washed over because you're tired. Mm-hmm. We have to remember that. So, from y'all's perspective, do you agree, disagree, and how do we, the people that are going to watch this, how do we get them to come to the same realization and showcase every week?
Well, I want to actually approach those separately. Because that's really two separate things that you were talking about. The first is how the studios help, and Jameson, I don't know. You have your own studio. I have my own studio. That's my laptop. But
that's all you need these days.
I have a problem because I'm not going to say I'm very talented, but I can play multiple instruments. I can play drums, I can play bass, I can play guitar, sing, acoustic, electric. And growing up in a recording studio that was my father's recording studio, and that's what he did. He played everything. Well, he never really played drums. He had an Akai MPC-60 drum machine, and I learned to program this thing like at 5 years old, and learned, and it was all half-inch reel to reel. I mean, this thing was a dinosaur studio by today's standards, and my laptop's a lot more powerful than that. But anyway, I digress. I'm chasing a rabbit again. The thing that I'm trying to get at is the one talent that I do not have is I do not have a talent for writing lyrics at all. None. Well, I've got a guy that I've known for a little while, and he's a learning guitar player. You know Tom. He's actually just been in touch with you about lessons.
Oh yeah, he's coming tomorrow.
Yeah. Well, anyway, he was asking me, hey, do you have any songs that are spun up and ready to go? So I let him hear that multi-track that I recorded just for that I had written and recorded just for the episode. And he said, hey, I've got lyrics that would go great with that. And he sent them to me. So all of a sudden, over the internet, because we have never actually even played together, over the internet, we're creating music together. And I've got a drummer that I've wanted to do some collab work that's up in Michigan, and a guitar player in Washington State. And because we all have our own little laptop studios, we can do that. So I've got these projects that I'm working on right now. I want to do a rock Christmas album. I want to do, a praise and worship album. That actually I was wanting to do some work with you on that too. But because we have these studios, that allows believers all over the world to come together and create something that worships God. And to that point, I believe, yes, you're absolutely correct. In this day and age, having that ability is probably one of the more important things as far as Christian music is concerned.
Yeah, we can literally write a song, record it tonight, and within 7 days, it would be available on all platforms,
Yeah, and I like where you went with that. The whole concept of being able to take people who specialize in certain things and work together. Jameson, you've written a lot of stuff end to end, so I won't say you're the exception, but you're definitely on the top percentage of people that do that. Most musicians, and I throw myself into this category, I write music. I don't write lyrics. I can write lyrics, but they don't go with the music. You know what I mean? So it is wonderful to be able to collaborate more effectively now.
Yeah, and that's always been a thing, but now, like I said, you can, you don't have to be in the same even country to do that.
Well, I'd like to just kind of wrap this up this week. We're going to try another one of these after the holidays, and we'll try a couple more episodes. I just wanted to make sure the overarching theme here is there's no overarching theme of these types of episodes. This is a roundtable discussion of, hey, what have we dealt with recently? How do we feel about certain things? The big takeaway from this episode is every church is different. Every pastor, every staff is different. Every musician is different. Heck, while we're at it, every sound tech is different. You know what I mean? Like, I don't claim to be the same.
They're all snippy.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. Did I say that all the way out loud?
No. We know we are. We just have to be, unfortunately. But we deal with guitarists. I mean, musicians.
My friend Scooter said, Carolyn, the musicians are touching the gear.
I will say, as I transitioned from music to AV Tech, it was all simultaneous. Having been a musician opened my eyes to being a tech, and now going the other way, it's the same way. I have a lot more acceptance. The problem is a lot of techs aren't musicians, a lot of musicians aren't techs, and there's always going to be that tension there. But anyway, without chasing that other rabbit, let's wrap this one up. I hope everybody enjoyed this. I would love more topics for the future roundtable episodes. So if you're watching this and you've got some ideas, please reach out, comments, contact us on the website. We'll throw together some more topics, but specifically we're going to be looking at things like hymns, traditional versus contemporary, maybe even blended. Look at that. What are they? How do you use them? Are they still valid? That's a question I've asked myself. I've heard some hymns that appear to be valid, but are they really hymns? They're called hymns, but are they? So we'll talk about that. The other thing was specifically about how can we make every piece that every one of us does individually better together. And I think we hit on that on pretty much every episode. But anyway, we'll go over some more topics. But before we close this out, either of y'all got any other thoughts on anything we've talked about?
I got my thoughts out pretty well.
Just the main thing the only other thing I want to reiterate is, education is sometimes just a conversation. So if someone is doing something on your team that bothers you, just have the nerve to go talk to them and say, hey, this is why this bothers me, or this is, and that's hard because people are people, but
do it in love.
Do it in love and try to explain your side. And if you still can't come to agreement, that's another thing. But like I was talking about earlier, if you will ask, 9 times out of 10, if you ask someone, they'll do it. If you ask, let's lower ourselves instead of raising this one thing up, then they'll do it and they'll understand, hey, that helped. That's all we had to do.
And related to that last point, having an awareness of when things are escalating and de-escalating quickly is a talent that not enough people have. When you see tension starting to rise, somebody needs to step in and say, hey, we're about to get into an area that we don't want to be in. Let's ask the questions that need to be asked. Right. So I agree with that fully.
Yeah. Of course, that's, the worship leader or whoever's, someone has to be in charge, and that's part of that
It's
job.
the sound man. It's the worship leader.
Well, and it doesn't, anyone can say anything, but, like I said, some situations you don't get into because you don't allow it to ever get to that point, Anyways.
Yeah,
we could talk all night, I'm sure.
Yeah, we could. We're going to wrap this one up. We're trying to keep these under a certain amount so that we can do more of them and more content. So anyway, if no other things, we're going to wrap this up, and we'll come back in with some more episodes soon. We hope you enjoyed it and hope you have a wonderful holidays. See you.
We'll see you.